Chinar, should we begin?
Just a second. Sir, should we begin? We're live on YouTube and the recording is also begun.
Unmute. Oh, is Catherine over there? Is Catherine over there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
She's here.
Hey, Catherine. Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks for joining. Yeah.
Nice to meet you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And
Should we begin, sir?
I'm sorry for the abrupt change.
No problem with that. I'm always there.
Okay. Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the post-lunch session. This is non-plenary session number 8, Rhizomatic Becomings, Techno-Social Assemblages. And please allow me to introduce the chair for the session, Dr. Catherine Juyu Cheng. Dr. Cheng received a PhD in English from National Taiwan Normal University. She is currently an associate professor in the Department of Foreign Languages and Literature at Feng Chia University. Her research interests are modern novels, science fiction, contemporary European philosophy, film studies, animation, and Buddhist philosophy. She serves as Secretary General, Director, Supervisor, Annual Camp Organizer, and Annual Conference General Convener of Taiwan Humanities Society. Recently, she has co-edited a book with Geoff T. N. Bradley titled Thinking with Animation. She has published numerous papers in NTU Studies, Tamkang Review, Chung Wai Literary Quarterly, Review of English and American Literature, and Humanitas Taiwanica. Her recent publications include The Post-Human Throw of the Dice in Cecil Liu's 3 Body Problems, Catatrophism and Creation in Shinkai Makoto's Yawning, The Virtual and Effect in Wei Te Sheng's Kanu, Nature and the Smiths in Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, The Runaway from Hell, Mad/Sacred Space in Doris Lessing's Briefing for a Descent into Hell, to name a few. Now I would like to request Dr. Cheng to please take over and formally begin the session.
Thank you for your introduction. Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Manoj. You are amazing. Yeah, trying to organize this beautiful event. And I know how hard it is for you to do it by yourself, okay? And then I'm Catherine Zheng. Nice to meet you all, especially the presenters here. Yeah, and actually, I think this one is really interesting because it's about rhizomatic becomings, okay? So I'm honored to moderate this session. And we have 3 speakers here. Yeah. First of all, we have Lorena R. Benares from University of the Philippines, Open University Philippines, isn't it? Hi. So you will be the first speaker talking about, your title is Weaving Rhizomes, Becomings in Between Photography, Assemblages, and Doing the Inquiry. That is really interesting. I'm into arts, okay? So I'm looking forward to your presentation later, okay? And then I'll move on to briefly introduce the following speakers, and then I will introduce you in details, okay? Yeah, so then we will have Elijah Joshua Benjamin D.F. Aben. Hi, nice to meet you here. Yeah, so you're from Polytechnic University of the Philippines, and you're talking about history, deterritorialization of fascism, and post-colonial discourse in the Philippines, okay? Yeah, very interesting topic. And then we will have the following speaker, Panagiotis Rupas from National Technical University of Greece. So your topic is transhuman aesthetics of spatial assemblages, the signifying register of affects, okay? So now I'm going to introduce the first speaker in detail, then I will ask you to, I will pass that over to you later. So Lorena Benares is a Doctor of Communication candidate at the University of the Philippines, Open University. Her work explores the intersection of art, philosophy, and the doing of inquiry, drawing on the works of Deleuze and Guattari, Michel Foucault, Karen Barat, oh, I like her a lot, and Donna Haraway and Brian Masumi, okay, those experts. As a creative purist, her research interest is on the impossibility of communication and the disruption of formalism and colonialism in art practice. Her dissertation led her to develop an epistemological research creation approach using Deleuze and Guattari's concept, the rhizome. Since then, she has been practicing and living the rhizome, actively exploring and developing new ways of art-based inquiry. Lorena earned both her bachelor's and master's degree in the Philippines. She has been teaching communication arts in the Philippines before coming to Cambodia to teach, at Panasatra University. Yeah. So now I will move it to you, okay? Thank you for your
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Catherine. Can I share my screen?
Sure, you can use it. Did you see the share screen down below? Let me see.
Okay, so I have
in the
20
middle,
minutes.
in the middle, yes.
So this is actually purely visual. I'm a visual artist.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
Okay, so this is actually a research creation. And I want to begin by situating this work with Deleuze and Guattari's rhizome. And I invite you to think with this quote as we navigate this inquiry. So Deleuze and Guattari writes, "The book is not an image of the world, it forms a rhizome with the world. There isn't a parallel evolution of the book and the world. The book assures the deterritorialization of the world, but the world effects a reterritorialization of the book, which in turn deterritorializes itself in the world." So following Deleuze, this inquiry is a rhizome. That is, the concept is used as a method of the inquirer. So this is already an articulation of what Erin Manning was talking about last night. So unlike the arborescent tree that is vertically structured, rhizomes crawl across without a hierarchy of structure. It consists of unformed matters and bodies that exist in relations of movement and rest, where subjectivity only emerges from its relational movement. So the traditional notion of research that is structured, rigid, and having step-by-step methods are refused in this form of inquiry. This is because, according to Deleuze, there is no method to thought. Instead, it encourages experimentation to let the methods emerge. So the inquiry is a living rhizome. So as a rhizomatic exploration, this inquiry explores the conditions of rhizome in photography and doing the inquiry. It investigates how materialities in photography and research are constituted, the photographer-researcher's entanglement with ecology rather than focusing on the product of actualization. It elaborates an ontological understanding of photography as a communication phenomena. As this inquiry moves as a rhizome, the experiment yielded visual braiding techniques as it accounted for the in-between, allowing textures of vitalities among humans and non-humans to rise, leading towards an event to come, the becoming of photography research and the becoming of research photography. Called weaving rhizomes, this onto-epistemological approach emerged from my experimental inquiry on what would work and how would it work when one lets thought take over during our photography encounters with Cambodia's Angkor temples. So as a nomad, navigating the site carries along Deleuze's ontology of immanence. The plane of immanence is the absolute ground where concepts are created. It consists of unlimited field of abstract machines, bodies without organs that are formless. It is a flat surface of virtual or potentials, forces or singularities moving at different speeds that produce but do not condition the actual. The plane is where rhizomes move and grow. Rhizome is connected and heterogeneous, non-hierarchical, characterized by multiplicity, and is a cartography as it weave and create plateaus. Photography as emerging phenomena can be mapped in a rhizome whose elements form an assemblage organized within the strata. An object emerges out of this interaction, probably a communication phenomenon. To create phenomena means constantly being entangled in the assemblages and letting those forces and energies drive the new. Epistemology, ontology, and methodology are woven together in the act of research creation. So therefore, post-qualitative inquiry is employed. So to put these philosophical concepts to work is to weave rhizomes. To map is to weave. Weaving is the production of fabric by interlacing two sets of yarn so that they cross each other, normally at right angles, usually accomplished with a hand or power-operated loom. So applied in this inquiry, Cambodia's Angkor complex is a living trace of religious site built by kings of the earliest Khmer civilization that thrived in Southeast Asia. As a monastic complex, photographing Angkor is merely a revival of the once powerful Khmer Empire shown through symmetrical and conservative photos designed for tourist consumption. This conforms to the formal weaving practice of balance sets, where the generation of its repetition produces the same old patterns, a reterritorialization of the same power. While this formal patchwork is rigid and follows a pattern, rhizomatic weaving disturbs and disrupts this colonial pattern, breaking the rigid lines by reconfiguring the weave towards the creation of the new. This interlacing is what attracts me. So disrupting the symmetrical balance in weaving loom, weaving rhizomes allows for any directions, recreating new designs. Combining these paradoxical binaries, consider the rhizome as multiple heterogeneous fibers, each with various levels of intensities woven together. Our task is to smoothen the striated space that arborify photography and research. As what Deleuze and Guattari contends, quote, what interests us in operation of striation and smoothing are precisely the passages of combination, how the forces at work within space continually striate it, and how in the course of striation, it develops other forces and emits new spaces, unquote. So in between this transition is the intercessor, together with the apparatus of weaving. Emerging from the mundane things we normally peruse, the mobile phone becomes our apparatus of weaving, recreating its function as body cameras. So while humanist methodologies treat video cameras as passive instruments in research, static and brute, this inquiry treats the apparatus as active agencies in research creation. According to Masumi, the object can be considered prosthesis of the body, provided it is remembered that the body is equally a prosthesis of the thing. Such interaction produces an entangled relation between the flesh, our cloths, and a host of other material fabrics. Human bodies and technologies cohabit each other in relation to particular life worlds. Like an octopus, its tentacular vision captures the mundane, making attachments and detachments, cuts and knots, as it weaves trails. Body cameras are wayfarers. So together with my messmates, photographers, we began exploring the site of Angkor. The choice of temples wasn't planned as we followed where our thoughts would take us. My interest was in unpacking the transition between the virtual to actual, the molar and molecular, which Deleuze refers to as molecular becomings. Virtual and actual acts reciprocally as movements are always in constant motion. Deleuze states, the actual object and the virtual image, the object become virtual, the image actual, are all figures dealt with in elementary optics. This distinction between the virtual and actual corresponds to the most fundamental split in time, and that is to say, the differentiation of its passage into two great jets, the passing of the present and the preservation of the past. So I examined these molecular becomings in photography practices. So when the team encountered the bas reliefs of apsaras, what caught our attention are the mutilated, deformed bodies of divinities. This is the bodily encounter, whereupon encounter, matters within the plane of immanence are identified as figures, or bodies, apsaras, rays of light, sandstone, camera lens, in other words, assemblages. For Deleuze and Guattari, quote, an assemblage is precisely this increase in dimensions of multiplicity that necessarily changes in nature as it expands its connections. There are no points or positions in a rhizome, such as those found in a structure, tree, or root. There are only lines. Figure becomes figurative when the image is constantly reworked, that is, figure is given character through different compositional enhancements. Sensation insists and subsists. It is what makes our body move. The image is deterritorialized when encasted on the camera apparatus. Image becomes part of the camera. The camera reterritorializes the image into new configuration until it reaches the figural, the becoming data of the photograph. This further deterritorializes as research and. The molecular becoming of figure to figuration happens when synthetic sensation entails the decomposition of the various sensational forces felt when first encountering the object, followed by a reconstruction of these forces placed upon the subject. Since the formation of the figure is an act of sensation, to render the sensation is for the loose to record the fact. The fact is sensation being rendered in a photograph. A photograph, therefore, is an assemblage of sensation. The transversality of figure, figuration, or figural, or the form, content, and expression, the basic components of communication, are always in its infinite becoming. The photograph ceases to be a representation of object, but a genesis of infinite becomings. Communication is a vital force that makes these assemblages interact. Interacting matters within an assemblage creates phenomena, the actualization of virtual from the plane of immanence. In between its movements, there is always difference in every repetition, deterritorialization and reterritorialization. Such deterritorialization is more pronounced when we got stuck in the covered gallery in the Gopuras entrance, a twin giant tree known as the fromager, with roots that have crept into the crevices of the covered gallery, was recently cut down in order to preserve the temple structure. Few meters behind it are granules of wood chopped from the tree were left strewn on the ground. In photographing the site, our bodies were bending, climbing, adjusting to the position of structures, chasing rays of light, while being seduced by the sound of critters and other co-inhabitants of the place. We were poised to capture anything, but what we realized is we were the ones captured by it. So despite the temptation of shooting the gallery of the divinities, the body shifted towards highlighting the fromager roots conquering the temple. To create a transcendent line of flight from the plane of immanence, there must be an absolute deterritorialization that can evade capture. Here, shift in sense happen in between. When the body encounters another matter or object, it ruptures by diverging from the normal anticipated photographs expected of a temple emphasizing its grandeur and power. The severance from the old context of power expected of a religious site is deterritorialized to new images, the figural. The Luz and Guattari explains a rhizome may be broken, shattered at a given spot, but it will start up again in one of its old lines or new lines. As seen in this inquiry, so this is now the result of when we overlaid, we're not actually expecting this, but when we overlaid the captured photographs, this is exactly the result. So as seen in this inquiry, rhizomes deterritorializing can grow from the edges of stabilized hierarchical roots. The one seat of power is deterritorialized by the ecology that now owns the kingly empire, a migration, the unfolding and unfolding of matters or bodies to create new assemblages. The fromager, it's the tree, reterritorialized the image of the temple, the latter becoming part of the root, the becoming root of the temple, temple becoming the root. Shooting the scene deterritorializes the image and is reterritorialized by the camera, heterogeneous elements in assemblage, forming a rhizome, a recasting, or a positive deterritorialization, recreating the old. This interference for the Luz and Guattari involves the scrambling of existing codes. Photography, therefore, can act as blockage to globalized coding machines. While you might find the visual uneasy on the eye, that is because it disrupts the conventional gaze we have gotten used to in judging images. The overlaid footage speaks of the chaos, the out of frame, the differences before a photo is actualized. The reality is in the difference, the becomings, or the in-between. So this inquiry opens up possible discourses to rethink photography, communication, and doing the inquiry as rhizomatic becomings. As a surface event, matters within the immanent plane that are unformed, not yet organized, encounter bodies, sensation works within bodies. Through constant subtraction and selection, formed matters became content in a pictorial plane that form compounds called expression, and that is the photograph. It is never the same and will never be the same as content and expression is always in constant motion. They intermingle, always reterritorializing and deterritorializing. Photography, therefore, is no longer a representation, rather it consists of lines of articulation, segmentarity, strata, and territories, but also lines of flight, of acceleration, and rupture. This surface event is what Deleuze calls movement, a transversality from one form to another. Quote, movement is a translation in space. Now, each time there is a translation of parts in space, there is also a qualitative change in the whole. What triggers these becomings is an abstract machine that emit and combine particles that have two very different modes of existence. It draws the cutting edges of decoding and deterritorialization. Becomings are rhizomatic movements of intensities, and each becomings forms new assemblages, new images. There are no bifurcation between form, content, and expression. Rather, they are part of the multiplicitous assemblages that does not contain the same molecular formula as content. Communication operates within this abstract machine that drives the interaction of assemblages, humans and non-humans, to its becomings. It is always co-constitutive, always becoming. As a rhizomatic phenomenon, it is always connected and heterogeneous, non-hierarchical in a flattened ontology, exhibiting multiplicity, and is a cartography of movements in thought. Rhizomes are assemblages in motion. So weaving the preceding data is a performative phenomenon, the welding of two heterogeneous series, photography practices and the doing of inquiry. This demonstrated the rhizomatic movement of bodies, matters, sense, and data as it emerges and unfolds during research creation process, an interacting phenomenon that forms a rhizomatic weave, the becoming of photography research and the becoming of research photography. What came out is an imbricated assemblage of footage data as I weave the footage from the different points of view at a single area or time. This challenges and disrupts the notion of time as unilinear compared to cutting video in sequences as slices of reality and incidents. I call this luminous entanglement, a diffractive technique that emerges from this inquiry, an interacting phenomenon in analyzing data as it unfolds, paying particular attention to the movements between bodies, materials, and discourses. The timeline becomes an immanent field where I mash up, combine, recreating the fractions of data as my body senses it, creating rhizomatic, luminous assemblages of sets, an experiment with order and disorder, an ongoing metamorphosis of data that never closes, but instead opens up to new possibilities. There is no doer before the deed. Instead, I am produced as a photographer researcher by my ongoing participation and engagement with data as I enact agential cuts. The footage data is deterritorialized and reterritorialized into new assemblages, creating the multiple, the becoming of photography research and the becoming of research photography. To create the multiple, Deleuze and Guattari encourage us to grow rhizomes and follow the lines of flight to reveal new potentialities, in this case, new knowledge. It asks us to situate our bodies on performativity, to be part of the transversality and phenomena, to respond as responsible researchers. Deleuze and Guattari recommends, quote, lay everything out on a plane of exteriority of this kind, on a single page, the same sheet, lived events, historical determinations, concepts, individuals, groups, social formations, broken chain of affects, and variable speeds with accelerations and transformation, always in relation with the outside. So, going back on our preamble, what this inquiry surface is, there is no longer a tripartite division between a field of reality and a field of representation and the field of subjectivity, unquote. The photograph is no longer the image of the world, but forms a rhizome with the world. It deterritorializes the world. This world link creates an effect, a reterritorialization. Photographs in turn deterritorializes itself when encountered by other matters and bodies and is further reterritorialized as data in research. Weaving rhizomes invites us to extend the lines of flight, create new ones, rev up intensities, and allow us to drift into the woods of assemblages. Trust that the new will always kick in because the world never sits still. So this is not an end, but a middle, a rupture into new assemblages that are about to come. So thank you. That ends my presentation. Over to you, Dr. Catherine.
Well, I like it a lot. Okay, here you are. I like the way you bring. You try to combine interaction, Marvel's interaction, and also the idea of folding, especially this idea of enfolding and unfolding in the fold. That interesting book, and also you try to use the concept of rhizomatic becomings. It's beautifully woven because the way you try to talk about weaving, it reminds me of one interesting animated film released in 2016. It's called Your Name by Shinkai. Yeah, he tried to talk about a very important concept of musubi. Yeah, about weaving. Yeah, actually it reminds me of the duration, the multiple durations in our cosmos, how we are woven together, okay? And also you talk about the recasting and deteriorization, very amazing one, okay? So I would like to discuss with you further later. Now we'll move on to the second presenter, okay? The second presenter is Elijah Joshua Benjamin D.F. Aban. He is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in History from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. His main interests are philosophy of history, history of social and labor movements, and history of ideas. He also presented his research papers entitled Rereading and Reinvestigating History, the Importance of the Philippine Revolution, Oral Tradition, and the Stream of Consciousness from Primordia Anatta towards Child of All Nations in culminating the Southeast Asian spirit towards internationalism in the PHA conference titled The Malay World, held at the De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines, and participated in the philosophical and international conferences of the Luz Guattari Studies in Asia at the University of Tokyo. I've been there too, okay? And also he talked about he's a father of 2 cats and occasionally a stepfather for stray cats. He makes a long walking and strolling the heavy streets of Metro Manila. So nice meeting you. You're a father of so many cats. Yeah. So now let's welcome the second speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Catherine. And of course, I'd like to reach upon my salutations for Professor Manoj, and of course for the whole committee of the Luz Guattari Studies India Committee for this invitation. Despite of my very positive introduction, what I will share to you is a very tragic and very pessimistic conditions of the Philippines right now today, because there is a specter hunting not communism in the Philippines, but rather the return of fascism, especially right now it's the election season in the Philippines. And right now I would like to disseminate that by means of first talking about the folkloric origins of the Philippines and valorizing it as an image for fascism. So there's this folkloric story in the Philippines, which is foretold and narrated always in every Filipino child, called Malakas and Maganda. So malakas is a word in Filipino, means strong, and maganda means beautiful in English. These 2 images are used by Oedipal forces in the Philippines that would like to return. Later, I will present a series of images to contextualize what I'm talking about. Since the post-colonial theories would establish its invasion and by making its own version of the Philippine archipelago, cultural trauma would haunt the Filipino mind by the means of unleashing its own creation, what I call the Filipino Oedipus. This is the exposure of the Filipino body to the colonial elements throughout the collection of images of events have surely made a different montage that affected the stream of consciousness of the Filipino body, or hence the Filipino people. This is from the creation and operation of one thing, for the specter that's supposed to be haunting around the world has been antagonized by the very effective neutralizer named the US hegemony, have privileged its fascist puppets by means of creating the Philippine Republic for today. And now all of the contingents for that, for have a proper enlightenment of the Philippines, for the proper and, should we say, forwarding and progressive minds of the Philippines, which is the labor unions and labor movements in the Philippines, were stagnated and forced to surrender by means of capturing the Asiatic and of course the mode of production in the Philippines, which has been dammed by a lot of forces by means of colonialism, brought by a lot of forces like the Spaniards, the United States, and of course the previous Japanese imperial government. And thanks to the help of colonial powers, the usage of images have been imminent, seeing the reciprocation of essence. And of course, by means of this imagery, we have been programmed that the native philosophy of the Filipinos, which is we must valorize and of course we must give this kind of image towards the women or Filipino women as the leader of the pack. We have been programmed that the male body is the one who will control and of course will lead us for an organization that will lead us to disaster right now. And with these particular reasons, we could see the shallow yet multitude meaning of signs when a Filipino sees an image of a particular leader. That reminds a certain leader that severes a collective desire will not lead him to construct an imagined community for it to have a holistic identity. Or maybe it's possible to have an identity together with the whole picture that would unite the fragmented pieces. And then, of course, with this kind of imagery, the fascistic machineries in the Philippines will not be built upon or established without the help of, so-called intellectuals that would help them to rise in power. Their work of art is one contemporary examples where a particular fact-finding instrument for identity became another tool for another fascist power to embrace via means of cultural entities and by means of using cinema, textbooks that were heavily revised, and of course, lineage or have this kind of trajectory to valorize their heroism despite the true tendencies of the powers, which is fascism. The historical narratives which were made in the past and collected by the Filipino historian, which is sponsored by the Filipino Oedipus, were driven to a crooked line of direction wherein there is no direction at all but to go to the path of the establishment. The voices of those who failed to enter the historical stream have passed their experiences throughout the methods that were surprisingly intended to be forgotten and be forgetful. Just like the local and oral tradition, writing of historiography in the Philippines, which is now heavily debated and always been ostracized by powers because they were considering the fact that documents, or should we say fragmented pieces that could be a conceptualizing, or should we say a catalyst for a national historiography, is always stagnated and ostracized by these institutions. Like cinema and other entities, art were used for the sake of power production wherein preservation of the government. It might sound viewed as revolutionary by some, but the case and outcomes were opposite. Instead of molding the pot for an identity to be remembered for the Filipinos, it is also a plot for a construction or forgetfulness, hence to revise the historical trauma that has been experienced by the Filipino people during the Dark Ages. And of course, with this, we have a lot of revisionism that has been given a lot today because it's election season right now in the Philippines, and sadly there is a specter that I have been talking about. I might be wrong because it's not a specter, but rather it's like a zombie-like figure that should be rotting inside of the coffin and will be inside of Satan's lair. But right now, it's a very dangerous situation right now in the Philippines because such momentum is happening right now. And it have already amalgamated in the main structure or stream of consciousness of the Filipinos online by means of social media like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And for that, what is the main agenda for this? I will now read the reclaiming of chaos. Despite that, this is a very pessimistic narration in the history of the Philippines. What is the role of the Luz and Guattari's philosophy for this kind of narratives? In their final work together in What is Philosophy, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari explored the concept of chaos. This concept is a necessity for the said professions who would swim the depths of immanence, prospects, and affects. These mediums were used by the subjects in papers wherein the Ferdinand Marcos, which is the late dictator of the Philippines, and the current leader, Rodrigo Duterte, have claimed the theme of affects. In a similar way, arts using power to manipulate and propagate their platforms and intensify their political mystification of art in reclaiming the Filipino body for their own sake, owning and remaking the forgotten place of artwork of the Filipino people, which is the primitive communal and socialist body of the Filipino, and political campaigns would intensify their propaganda machines by using art and its conceptual like architecture, and it was called like emulsification or beatification program. Structures like symbolizes hope to science and reclaiming history were built, and creativity and culture were vigorous in order to retain the vague production of desires and to collectivize the concept of fascism borrowed from the vulgar ultranationalist tendencies of Nazism and Italian fascism propagated on the cultural affiliations by their fascist propagandas. Despite the tragic situations of the Philippines and the Filipino people have already experienced contingencies of the events that were thwarted by the latter epochs, submerging the Filipino body to obscurity, the Filipino historian and intellectuals would be involved to the dichotomy of being an enabler to the hybrid monster fascist Filipino and being the writer per se who would create the narrative millions of voices that were rampaged and erased in the contingent of history. The current system and the latter again in this subjected paper both have enablers who were in fact opportunists in the time of war and crisis. These are the academics who were inside the schools of the system trying to cover and fix the leakages of the system's broken flaws and flux. The continuation of this production would continue to the next generation until the revolutionary bodies would recuperate their weapons and once again win the desires of the masses without using their methods. For this juncture, my friends, I would like to present a series of images that would like to contextualize what I'm presenting right now on my paper. So here, now, as you can see, my esteemed colleagues, this is one of a depiction of what I'm talking about. Malakas and maganda. Malakas means strong and maganda is beautiful. And you can see right now here, there's a modification, but rather a designation to the faces that would suffice and characterize these two folkloric figures in the Philippines into the faces based on the two most outrageous leaders in the history of the Philippines, which is the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos and his partner in crime, which is Imelda Marcos. Now, this is what I'm talking about, the enablers, or should we say, those who valorizes the powers in order for these powers or fascistic desires to retain. There was this once statement declared by the Coalition of Writers and Artists for Freedom and Democracy. So you can see right there, there's a lot of list of names who were popular back then by the popular media during the re-election, or should we say the desire to come back of Ferdinand E. Marcos during his time. So as you can see, he was the president of the Philippines for 2 decades, and he did not did that or achieve that by means of magic. So he spread and scattered his arms, or should we say apparatuses of captures in the Philippines in order to retain in power. And by that, he had this a lot of help from a lot of writers who are right now declared as national artists of the Philippines, despite of this tragic phenomena that happened in the narratives of history, but yet this was thoroughly being erased, or should we say placed safe, or should we say taught in the Philippine education system by means of objectivity that we should not return in this kind of issue. So in a zoom, in a more closer look, so that is the declaration of the Coalition of Writers and Artists for Freedom and Democracy. And as you can see right there, there's an obvious statement that this is a campaign of this popular artists and intellectuals campaigning for the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos and his Vice President Tolentino. And Ferdinand E. Marcos is not also a joke type, and why I am comparing him similar or resonating to Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. That's why I have this conclusion that despite that they would not explicitly admit that they idolize Adolf Hitler, or should we say idolize Benito Mussolini, he also patronized his cultural fascistic tendencies by means of releasing publications such as this, Today's Revolution, Democracy. And as I've read that way back in my high school days, it was very well written. Whoever the ghostwriter might be, I hope he has a lot of money from doing that and propagating lies to the Filipino people. And right now, of course, in the world, this is one of the phenomena and darkest age in the Philippine history, which is the declaration of martial law in September 21, 1972. And by that, there are still a lot of unsolved human rights violation that has been done under the martial law era from 1972 and 1986 by the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos. A lot of them have been disappeared and never been surfaced since then until the ouster of the late dictator Marcos in 1986. Despite there are a lot of court callings from the international court, the Marcos dynasty or the Marcos family are still vehemently and explicitly not admitting and of course not disclosing these crimes or heinous crimes that they did during their time. And sadly, for for everyone's laughter, sadly, this is how anachronistic Filipinos are when it comes to looking back about this symbolisms. This is very embarrassing to share with you, my esteemed colleagues, but apparently way back in the 2016 election, there is a certain Filipino who filed his candidacy that he will like to rule as the president of the Filipino people, as like what Adolf Hitler have done in World War II Germany. And as you can see in the ordinary masses, the symbolism of swastika has been all around in the Philippines, despite they don't have that proper education background regarding with the idea of swastika and its tragic and trauma that has been done throughout the history of the world. And as I share to you, this is one of the personalities who were victims of the Marcos dynasty. His name is Archimedes Trajano, and what Mr. Archimedes Trajano just did is he just questioned the daughter of the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos towards his daughter Imelda Aimee Marcos. But apparently, because the question was very critical and has tendencies to have an anti-Marcos statement, Mr. Archimedes Trajano's body was found in September 2, 1977 in Manila, in the streets of Manila, covered in his own blood. So he just questioned regarding with the governance of the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos towards the daughter of the dictator. And apparently by September 2, 1977, and this was still martial law era in the Philippines, his body was found in the streets of Manila covered in his own blood. And another controversial figure here is Luis Mijares. Luis Mijares is the son of Primitivo Mijares, who explicitly undisclosed disclosed the atrocities and the puppetry of the Marcos dynasty by means of manipulating all of the events in the Philippines, including the fake assassination attempt to the then late dictator. It was orchestrated, and when this publication has been published throughout the Philippines, the son of Primitivo Mijares was disfigured, and his genitalia area was also violently disfigured. And apart from that, the writer of that book, Conjugal Dictatorship, he was said to be killed and executed by means of flying up in the helicopter in the air and pushed his body and his carcass very, very high feet from the ground. That's how brutal it is. And to make this presentation slash exposition very depressing for our part in the Philippines, you know, when Rodrigo Duterte, the current president of the Philippines, stepped in power, he declared that Ferdinand E. Marcos will be approved to be buried in the Libingan ng mga Bayani, or in English, Heroes Cemetery. So there's a lot of movements that vehemently created the greatest effort to stop this tragic event, but then again, by means of holding the power of the executive powers and the interment of the late dictator to the Heroes Cemetery has been established. And to make things more worse, the son of the late dictator that we have been talking about, the Filipino Oedipus, is set to run and look to reclaim the power of the Philippines by 2022, together with the vice president or his tandem, the one who approved the burial for the Heroes Cemetery of Ferdinand E. Marcos, Sara Duterte. And now, let me just read the postscript for my presentation for today. This is just a short passage. For the benefit of the doubt that still contain De Luz and Guattari's ideas to evade the concept of a revolution, especially when we are referring to the radical ones, a simple reminder would be enough to incline De Luz and Guattari that they sought to seek a kind of revolution emanated by victims of the current trend or arms of imperialism, neocolonialism, fascism, and the capital. From the declaration of a call to arms reflected from his dialogue in negotiations that he, De Luz, and Guattari have remained Marxists, to his invitation to look for tools against fear, and his epiphany on writing the unfinished project of the grandeur of Marx, to the multiple lines of books such as Empire and Multitudes of Negri and Hart that mentions the new People's Army that has been battling fascism and the puppet regime in the Philippines. It is inevitable to think that the specter has touched De Luz and Guattari to the fact they are subsumed to what Jameson defined as the untranscendable horizon of interpretation. And I think that De Luz and Guattari's life, imminent, and vitalism philosophy will be a catalyst for us Filipinos to reclaim and, of course, awaken the historical trauma that has been flourished by the then late dictator and its fascist machineries. That's all. Thank you.
Wow. After hearing the terrible, miserable situation in the Philippines, okay, especially when you talk about the Marcos dynasty and you talk about the Charles catastrophic events. Yeah, it is really horrible, especially when you try to describe it so vividly. Okay, yeah. So we have friends like Alex and Junmei. Especially Alex is an expert on fascism. So Alex, are you there? So now I think the floor is open for you to ask questions, because I guess the third presenter is not able to present, is it? Manoj?
Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, so probably we'll have to open the floor for them to ask questions, because the third one is not available, isn't it?
Yeah. We
Okay,
can have
that's good.
discussion.
We can discuss more, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So now I think the floor is open, because I was amazed by the two papers, okay, the two presenters. Yeah, and you already showed with us some amazing ideas. The first one is about how photography can really lead us to the zone in between. Naturally, you can try to combine so many amazing ideas about images, okay? And the second one, well, the images are really horrible. I'm thankful that you didn't show me the pictures of the disaster, because that would be too much for us to bear. Yeah, but really the ideas are amazing. So maybe you can try to ask each other question first, then we will open the floor for the audience. First of all, can I ask Banaris? Yeah. So you try to use the concept of interaction. That is amazing, because I like the way you try to use that to remind us that actually we will be kind of having not interaction, but interacting relationship with events around us, okay? So we will be captured into that kind of new image, because while we are trying to interact with the world, we are actually recaptured into the image of the world that is created by that shot, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I was actually, when I read about the loose, I was fascinated. I was also side by side, I was reading Karen Barad, and it's somewhat strange for me because, you know, Karen is dealing with quantum physics, but I was thinking of reading it diffractively, diffractively with the loose rhizome and Karen Barad's interaction, agential realism. And I found it that they can be somehow interconnected, no? Because I was looking forward to this knowledge creation process. Well, while the rhizome moves, the movement that what Deleuze calls the surface event, I was looking into the bottom part of it, and that's the interaction, so that it will be able to look at our bodies and performativity in generating new knowledge.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Junmei is the one who used this idea. And then also I try to use her idea too. So I think this idea is really interesting, especially it's famous in Taiwan. Yes. Yeah. And then as for, do you want to say something?
Yeah, and the good thing with that interaction. Yeah, and then I was also fascinated with that interaction, because for new generation researchers to articulate what the delusion philosophy is, to apply it in not just in analyzing data, but in the doing of the inquiry. So what we are actually trying to advocate also, so it's not just on the application of the data, but on the doing of the inquiries. It's partly because we have to live the philosophy of Deleuze. We have to live the philosophy of rhizome for us to be able to discover what is really inside and to come up with a new, that the result of the weaving rhizome.
I like the idea. And then you try to make it move and leave. Okay, that's interesting and beautiful. So Junmei, would you like to share with us your ideas?
About what? I'm sorry because I missed the first 20 minutes or so, so I didn't really catch your talk.
She's trying to use Karen Barad's idea about interaction and diffraction. Yeah, I think that it reminds me of you.
Yeah, I wrote about that, and the idea between interactivity and rhizome does have some, I would say, some conceptual affinity. Yeah. And for me, that I think that's it's time for question. I shouldn't just use the time to elaborate my concept, right? So
it's okay. We are looking forward to it, especially for a beautiful lady.
So I mean, but for me, both ideas are based on the modern or rather maybe even postmodern techno-scientific I would call molecular term. But when you go molecular, it's necessarily you also go submolecular. And when you go to a submolecular world, everything is connected with anything else, right? We have this entanglement everywhere, this ecological and evolutionary entanglement. And I missed your talk, but I saw the picture of the root, the trees, and I love it. I mean, as this is actually from my paper. I'm going to present tomorrow part of that, because the root actually says there is rhizome in the root, in the tree, and there may be the tree structure in the rhizome. Their relationships are not dualistic. Yeah, it's all about becoming. Yeah, and even maybe we can talk about a molecular entanglement of all kinds of becomings. Yeah, and this also is in a sense an interactive process, I would say, in our planetary life. Yeah. So I think I'll stop here. I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you, Jimei.
Thank you, Catherine.
Nice to meet you here again. Yeah. Hi,
Always.
we have Barbara. Yeah, you can ask questions now.
Yeah, Elijah, Joshua Benjamin, I was very moved by your presentation. And I just wanted to ask you, you probably know that for many years, it was a Filipino indigenous woman, Mrs. Corpus Tolly, who was responsible and running all the negotiations for indigenous people across the world after the voting of the Declaration of Indigenous People by United Nations in 2007. I don't know if other young people, formidable group here is aware of that, but India signed this declaration too, even though it probably doesn't really respect it like many countries. But I was wondering now, Mrs. Tolly Corpus has finished her mandate. She did a very powerful statement in Australia when she went to visit, denouncing structural racism. And I was wondering if there was any impact of her involvement at the United Nations in relation to the terrible situation that you have described.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Barbara, for that question. But sadly, as I have laid all the cards of the tragic situation right in the Philippines, all of these events that advocate indigenization for the sake of liberation of the Filipino people and recognizing a proper identity for a proper nation or proper nationality. We are still inclined to the thinking of charismatic leaders. And all of this indigenization theories, indigenization advocacies are just subsumed and absorbed and is manipulated by the system. And apparently there is not that a lot of impact that, and a lot of people don't know that the Philippines is one iconic nation that have overthrew a dictator, but still look at right now in the 21st century, a lot of people are desiring to return the monster that has laid all these tragic events right now and traumatic events in the Philippines. And the thing that I have written and the motive of this paper that I have written together with and of course with the help of all of these possibilities that have laid by the Luz and Guattari's ideas, you should say that it's very close to hopelessness, despite that the Luz's and Guattari's ideas are for the hopeful and a lot of possibilities. But despite that, that's the harsh truth that the impact of a Filipino in a Filipino raising the flag for a proper indigenization. And of course, to let me take this opportunity to say that as I have attended a lot of conferences that involves, of course, together with our friends in India, comparing to the Filipinos that are talking about post-colonial discourses, I took that that the that our friends on the our Indian friends are more engaged on radical perspectives and post-colonial theories rather than us Filipinos. We would like to always play it safe, and we would like it always as a neutralizer, making it more attractive to this fascist and of course this manipulative politicians. And in fact, sadly, Professor Barbara and my esteemed colleagues, a lot of also people from the Philippines that are members of the indigenous groups, they are also vehemently supporting this advocacies or fake advocacies of the son of the late dictator and the daughter of the tyrant of the current Republic of the Philippines. Even though I know that there's some safety issues when we are declaring this kind of subversive and of course radical thoughts, but that's the harshest truth right now. A lot of young people don't know that, and if you're going to spit that facts or talk about that facts, they will say that it's a mere black propaganda against their charismatic leaders. And that's the saddest part right now in the Philippines.
Well,
Despite
thank
the
you very
efforts
much, but I
of,
think this is faced by,
teaching this.
yeah, it's faced by many countries, and in a way, I think Deleuze and Guattari might help us to continue to invent tools, weapons, to try to change these very dangerous attractions. Well, I will talk a little bit about that just after this session. See you later.
Let me just share this. Yesterday there was this written article on the established publications in the Philippines called the Manila Times, and there's this writer or intellectual have declared that fact checking, or should we say a process or methods of verifying facts, are colonial and should be neglected. So that's how sad the current situation right now in the Philippines when it comes to revolutionary ideas like checking facts or cross-checking propaganda versus factual truth. So we are sadly the Philippines have been contained of this kind of anachronistic thinking, while the 21st century across the globe, we are now trajectorizing on a planetary thinking. Right now, the Filipino people are still inclined to this charismatic thinking and false antagonizing of concepts that are declared as colonial and should be neglected, such as fact checking. So,
Well,
just
I don't
just
know if
another sharing from that. Yes.
do we have in this group anybody from Taiwan?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I think the fact checking has become a widespread strategy that I think Deleuze and Guattari would be supporting very much in the way it's been taken over by the people.
Yes.
Okay, see you later.
See you later.
Yeah, Catherine, I will also add something to the discussion. I was deeply disturbed by the presentation done by Elijah, and this was also kind of a sort of situation that we face in India as well, like in terms of the global rise of fascism. I think Alex also would have definitely so many things to say about it. But in the Indian context, and I was trying to understand the context in Philippines as well. For example, the notion, the role of populism in the larger context of fascism, like in one level. In another level, how it is kind of connected with something what you call sort of a liberal politics, or something you say certain form of micro-fascism, which you don't really address as something very relevant, or which escapes your or you say the negotiation of power in terms of negotiation of power in terms of negotiations in terms of obtaining power, which kind of lead to these sort of things. So I do want to know what's the constitutional element of like if we can shed a little more light on that aspect in the context of Philippines.
Yeah. So apparently in the Philippines, the what I could relate to the micro-fascist tool, which is a very helpful tool for fascists to reclaim power, is a lot of pastimes are spent by a daily Filipino citizen on just checking on Facebook. There's a lot of just cheap promos on mobile devices in the Philippines that give service for free Facebook, despite that you have a little ample of money in your mobile credit to access the internet. So rather than checking, or should we say diverging your everyday life from an exhausting day, everyday working in everyday life. So you're just scrolling across on Facebook, and the problem with Facebook is it has no proper fact checking resources to remove this propagandas that are widespread used by the the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos, and of course the current tyrant in the Philippines. So a lot of pages that are designed to be a certain image was changed and converted into a propaganda machinery, and they created this kind of instrumentalization to be easily digested and consumed by those who are scrolling around Facebook. And by easy manipulating all the information, and of course reclaiming again that the time of the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos is considered to be the golden age of the Philippines, because a lot of Filipinos are blinded to that false fact that the value of the Philippine peso and the value of the US dollar is almost the same. It's like 1:2, and it is spread across a lot of Facebook pages. And there's this a lot of studies also that this pages supposedly handled by individuals, they are certain kind to be explicitly disclosed that they are sponsored by cronies, or should we say propaganda machineries of the said tyrants that are wanting to return in the powers in the Philippines. So in everyday life in the Philippines, I could say the micro-fascist tendencies of every Filipino life that would suffice their tendencies to reclaim that kind of thought or to be trapped in historical trauma is by means of consuming mass media such as Facebook. And it has a lot of mobile carriers in the Philippines are offering I should say almost of all of them are offering free Facebook access to all handlers or subscribers and their promos. And that's why certain kind of information like that without proper fact checking, and of course technology is more fast rather than the traditional teachings, or should we say traditional fact checkings, then there's quite a lot of light for those monsters to return in power. And sadly, that's how I see it in the perspective right now in the generation Z, or should we say in the millennials that are always uh, soaked in the realms of social media. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your explanation. And also, now, are there any questions from the audience? Normally, we will have to stay until 5:30, but since we only have two speakers here, so should we?
Do we no other questions for the speakers?
Mm-hmm.
We can have discussion for some more time. It's like our next session is at 3:15, so we can at least have 10 more minutes discussion if there are questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I've seen some friends like Peggy. Or Alex.
Alex would definitely have something.
May I, Catherine?
Yeah.
Hi.
I was just wondering, Joshua, that what about this discussions in the academic scenario, like how because the pathetic pictures and the danger zones you are living in. So how does academia respond to it?
Because of my because on the circle of my Facebook friends, with the help of course international friends such as Professor Manoj, and of course a lot of a lot of my friends in the academe are also vehemently making some steps in order to stop this misinformation that is happening in the Philippines. But sadly, they are just the minority. And, it will also reflect on the mostly basis that academicians are also poor ones, or should we say unfortunate. It has been proven that one of the professions or noble professions in the Philippines, being an academician is not amenable for surviving. So that's why a lot of them have no say or zero say about the misinformation that is happening right now in the Philippines. But those who have been established or tenured by means of this um, agencies or dangerous agencies, they are more likely to become tenured in a young age in a questionable way. And a lot of them have many access to some of these perks or features that cannot be accessed by those who are genuine, those who are advocating right information or fact checking. And that is the sad states right now. And I think the motive of that why I presented this paper to this kind of conferences, that is how I reflect it for today. Maybe a lot of academicians have opinions, or should we say stand, but right now in the crisis, not only in the political scenario in the Philippines, but also brought by the pandemic, a lot of things have changed, and especially in stance. So right now, it's rhizomatic in a negative way. It's scattered. It's very scattered in a negative way that we have no particular becoming for us to become liberated and, should we say, awakened with this kind of scenarios in the Philippines. And that's all, Professor Menu.
Yeah, and by the way, is the social media and things like that also being censored by the ruling governance?
There's a
have-
lot of yes, there's a lot of studies, and of course a lot of should we say very objective media establishments have been exposing that um, this social media platforms are also controlled and sponsored and showered and funded by government agencies that will spread across these tragic events that I am exposing right now. And one particular event, thank you for that question, Professor Manu. And, the son of the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos, Marcos Jr., who will run for president, we were very alarmed that we have received a emergency alert coming from a government agency explicitly saying that we should vote for him in the coming of elections, or in this coming of election. And there is a law prohibiting that kind of activity, that emergency notifications should be only used on proper basis, such as earthquake drills, or should we say like a typhoon coming in the Philippines. But vehemently and mysteriously, we were very alarmed that we have received a text message coming from a government agency that we should vote for him in the coming of the elections. And that's how sadly social media and of course technology has been used as an apparatus of capture by these agencies to prevent our rhizomatic thinking of the Filipinos, because the Filipinos is so diverse, in the whole world as the most hospitable people in the world. But in the areas of such as politics and thinking, sadly, we are very anachronistic and way back, especially when we are reflecting to the masses or to the public. That's why.
Thank you, Joshua.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add response to the question of Dr. Mino Gupta? No, so in terms of, because I taught in the Philippines for 10 years. So half of my life is in the Philippines and half of my life is here in Cambodia. So I think that the universities and academic institutions are very much against this, dictatorship. And in fact, most of them are contradicting the comeback of this power. But what happens now is I think with the onset, the power of the social media, it's like it really spreads like it deterritorializes and then further reterritorializes that same old power. So it's quite amazing for Filipinos, and even me, I was amazed why, despite everything, despite the campaigns, the misinformation, malinformation, and the disinformation, still there's a lot of Filipino people who would cling into those um, uh, the previous rulers, like especially, of course, the Marcos, the comeback of the Marcos. And that's quite amazing because they were able to tap in this the masses. But I think it's interesting because it has something to do, I think, also with the affect that's proliferating in social media. The social media actually becomes a very powerful tool, and they were able to make use of that to spread the lies and to convince people, even intellectuals. There are intellectuals who can easily, that's quite amazing because they can easily be convinced already by, it's like that this is the future savior of the Philippines. So the recent election, as I was monitoring it in social media, so it's something that I think it's a warning, despite the fact that most of those in the academia are denouncing that kind of power. So, but it seems though that this social media is really trying to create a different, a mixture of revolution that will bring back the same old power. So that's just like I remember the era of Donald Trump. So many people are not aware why he was seated into power. So we still, well, hopefully Elijah is so young, so the Gen Z and the millennials hopefully will be able to pull it back towards the territorialized into different sphere.
Yeah, I was raising the same question earlier, like in terms of populism. For example, in Indian context, the politics of populism, which gets articulated through religious fundamentalism at one level, or it could be through other means, like mass media could be one of it, but the constitution of it could be multiple. I was just curious about what would be the populist constitution of fascism in Philippines, like especially in a autocratic society, it's like more the articulation of populist politics. How does it really function there?
Um, um, it functions in a lot of in a lot of concepts. For example, the current president of the Philippines right now, he is advocating a war on drugs, and we should be vigilant against drugs. And a lot of people are trapped into that. And of course, it makes sense that it might be close that the 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 son of the late dictator Ferdinand E. Marcos is coming close to the power, because it is also one advocacy of the old man Marcos to eradicate drugs. And once there's this saying that they want to always prosper in the Philippines. If we want progression, we should be disciplined. So it's always the concept of discipline, good morals, and of course the vehement anti-drug campaign, which led to drastic measures like extrajudicial killings. In fact, here in my neighborhood, we have witnessed 2 to 3 bodies lying around the streets of our suburbs, and they were written by a certain kind of message that it's saying in Filipino, "Wag tularan, addict ako. Don't inspire to become me. I'm an addict." And sadly, they are just victims of society, and sadly they were victimized by this war on drugs campaign that was highly popularized by the current president today in the Philippines. And yeah, this is a very close call. That's why yeah, sadly there's a threat right now for him to be called by the international court. But to prevent that, he disclosed his cards by making her daughter to run for an executive position as vice president. And I think he will step down as a president of the Philippines, and he aspires to run as a senator here in the Philippines to remain in power, so that he will be recognized on the sovereignty, and he has the right to decline for the calling of the international court for his crimes that he created here in the Philippines. Yeah. Sorry to become very personal, but that's the everyday life that I witness here in the streets of Manila. So, yes.
Indeed. Seems to us that we are pondering, yeah. And so I think time is almost up, and I don't want to end this beautiful event, but we have to. So we can continue to talk about this in the near future, face to face. Yeah. And thank you, Manoj, for organizing this beautiful event. And I think we'll continue to listen to the other speakers, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Catherine, for chairing the session within short notice. I'm really sorry that for troubling you a lot.
No, not at all. I enjoy it a lot. I like their papers, and also I for witnessing this situation. I think what you mentioned is really
Yeah, thanks, presenters. Like it was great to listen to you, and thanks for joining us for the presentations as well. Like there should be more discussions like this. I think this was the session in which we could get really some time for sort of discussing more about the political scenario elsewhere as well. Like we are also concerned in the same way. We are also encountering different modes of different modalities of a fascist regime, right? In that sense, or what we call liberal fascism or something, which we cannot really be aware of, or we ourselves are unknowingly subjected to in many ways. So it was a great discussion, and it was really a bit disturbing, but still good to have this discussion. So we move on to the next session right now, but we will have 15 minutes of 10 minutes at least break, sort of for the switch over. But when we come, it's not we are breaking, we are here, we are in the same link, but we have the next plenary session. We have Professor Barbara Glausiewski, Emin Gorgul, and Professor Henry Somersall giving the plenary lectures. And Professor Alex will be chairing the next session. So let's wait for the speakers to join us, and then we can have some discussion.